Lawrence, but Sam uses the whisper on him and it works.
Yes. This is also, like, we see Dean in this moment where Sam's like, well, let's just check it out just in case. Like, we see him take a moment for replying, I know we do, and we kind of just watch this, like, him put himself through this battle, and it's all on his face. Like, it completely plays out on his face.
Jensen is top-notch.
Jacking choices.
Yes. Jacking choices, we are here for them. But, like, we see him go through, like, not wanting to face his past trauma and all that and, like, get involved in that again. Because it's the most traumatic thing in his life to this point that's happened to him. And so we don't want, like, he doesn't want to face that. So we see him, like, struggle with that. But then we also see him struggle with his strong will to prevent that from happening to anyone else. And we just, we watch it all happen on his face. But I think it's so funny because this is an example of how, even very early on in the series, before they were, like, really getting into, like, the roundness of their characters, especially Dean's character, it's so funny how even here they were, like, addressing that, like, the epitome of Dean Winchester is to, like, aid others at the expense of himself, the self-sacrificing, the self-hating Winchester. Like, that is the epitome of Dean Winchester, is letting the ladder of that idea of, oh, I don't want to go back, but I don't want this to happen to anyone else. Like, we see the ladder of that win out because Dean is just like, oh, well, I mean, if it helps other people but hurts me, like, it's no competition. So that's something that I think it's so funny. It's so evident, like, his innate nature to help others at the expense of himself, even this early on when he's a misogynist.
Especially because it's Sam asking him to do it.
Right.
I think we also saw it back in Wendigo when Dean said, like, our family's screwed up and I can't fix that, but I can make sure other families don't get screwed up. Here, he's, like, really backing it up, and I think it's really paralleled by the fact that it's their house and it's a family that looks not unlike their family. It's really paralleled there. Because, yeah, Dean vowed never to go back to their former home, like, ever. It's interesting. Sam specifically says back home, even though in, like, the previous episode, Bugs, and in the previous episodes, Sam said he never had a home. Doesn't really, have a place like that. He has no actual memories of living in this place. He was 6 months old when Mary died. He's never lived in any other one place until Stanford, so he's, like, adopted this sense of home as this place he's never even really been, just from John and from Dean. This is the place they identify as home.
Right, and this is something early on in the series that I was like, oh yeah, like, this kind of hits home, like, for me, because, like, being military growing up, it was the exact same way for me. Like, I was just like, people would be like, oh, like, where are you from? And you're like, how do I answer that question? Where was I last? Where was I the longest? Where was I born? Like, because, like, I technically I was born in Oklahoma. I don't remember Oklahoma. I was 3 years old when we left, so I don't remember anything. But, people are like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, what do I say? My parents' current address? Like, so I think this is something that I was just like, oh, I resonate with that. So I think it's very interesting, like, exactly like that he calls it home because he has no attachment there. So what's that about, I wonder?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing for Sam to have said. I think we're gonna get more into that later, maybe. But they get to Lawrence and they knock on the door, and Dean starts to lie about who they are, but Sam goes with something sort of close to the truth. He uses their real names. The nice mom's like, oh, I think I found some of your photos last night, and then lets these two unknown men into her home, which is a bold move, Jenny. I wouldn't do that, but you know what? It's fine. She did.
Works for her.
This entire episode, except for I think a little bit briefly, the boys are themselves. They use their real names. And it's pretty rare to go an entire episode without the boys just outright lying about their identities, but they don't lie to Jenny and they don't lie to Missouri.
Yes.
And I think it's really important that they don't in this one because they're being confronted with their roots and their past and the road that they're on now. And I think this episode calls back to Bloody Mary quite a lot, with, like, Sam vowing never to tell Dean about these dreams and then telling Dean about these dreams, like,
right.
So I think we're back in that mind frame of Bloody Mary and, like, being who you are and, like, secret about things. So I think we're back there.
Secrets. That's a lovely thing in this series.
And I love that they're confronting the place that made them as themselves. Like, that is just so powerful.
There's a very hyper toddler asking for juice named Richie.
We love Richie.
We love Richie.
Stunning performance.
The actor who played Richie understood the assignment.
He has his priorities in line.
Yes, understood the character motivation perfectly.
Absolutely.
Acted the heck out of it.
I thought that was method acting.
The other child is about school-aged and named Sorry. Initially, I thought her name was Sammy, and I was like, Sammy's a little too on the nose, but I was like, that's a little much. But it's Sorry with an R. Jenny, who's the mom, tells them that the house is getting old. She kind of complains about the house. The lights are flickering. The sink is backed up. There's rats in the basement. I know that you guys have things to say about this, about Dean's reaction to this conversation.
Yes.
Because Dean's a little bit upset looking.
So I think it's interesting to see that she assumes, because Dean's looking not so great right here, because, you know, he's back in his childhood home that caused him a lot of trauma. It was his first and biggest trauma of his life, so he's not looking too hot. And she assumes that he's looking uneasy because she's bashing his childhood home, but in reality, it's because Dean is overwhelmed and battling with the scars that this place has left him. And so I think it's interesting to see, because usually Dean is really good at masking what he's feeling. He's really good at hiding his true emotions because he's had to with the way John raised him. But here it's just spelled all out on his face. And it really is the most traumatizing moment of his life. This is where all the bad started. All bad and the cure that happens is because of what happened here.
You know, so, I really love that you mentioned that he's showing more of his emotions, because it kind of goes back to them fronting this as themselves and not lying.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, we love that.
I have a thought about Jenny and about how Sam and Dean are looking at Jenny in this moment as well. Because Sam's only context for his life, his early life, is what John's told him, basically. Because I very much feel that Sam was only allowed to ask John about Mary because Dean just never wants to talk about her in any of the scenes that we see them. Mm-hmm. And his reaction to Sam mentioning her in the pilot was very angry and violent. I feel like Dean wasn't talking about her as a kid. I feel like everything Sam knows about Mary, he learned from John. And obviously John has painted this picture of Mary being the perfect wife and the perfect mother. We're going to learn later on in the series that that's not necessarily true.
Yes.
And Jenny is recently a single mom. We don't know where her partner is, the father of her two children. She was looking at some of her own wedding photos when she was unpacking in the first scene, and she seemed upset. We're not sure if he died or if there was some sort of marriage dissolution that happened, but yeah, Sam doesn't have that context that their parents ever were not in a happy marriage, but Dean does. Dean has that context, so I'm wondering if he's seeing that as well when he's looking at Jenny, who's, you know, a newly single mom with two young kids.
Maybe.
Because it seems like, you know, that could have become a potential outcome in their lives. Like, I mean, it's totally plausible that John and Mary could have worked their shit out. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that I feel like Dean could be remembering that.
Could you see John Winchester go into therapy?
No, but I also feel like, you know, therapy also was less common in the 80s as well.
You know, marriage counseling was still a thing.
Oh,
that's true.
Right.
You know, you mentioned that she's like a newly single mom, and I just think it's interesting that like her kids are older than Dean and Sam were. So it's like they're looking at the way they could have been in the future.
Yeah.
Right. But would they really have seeked out marriage therapy when they had Dean to be their therapist?
That too. They also, yeah, they 100% want to put that on their their small child.
Alright, I'm just gonna mute myself and cry for a bit.
It's not exactly a headcanon, but it's a theory I have that John would have been a crap parent anyway, even if Mary stayed alive, because, like, of the way, like, he kind of raised his kids with kind of, like, military lifestyle, blah, 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 but also, like, that they had already placed that on Dean at such a young age before things were even problematic in their family, quote unquote.
Yeah.
You should not be putting anything on a child.
On a 4-year-old.
Like, so much emotional labor on a kid who doesn't really understand emotions yet.
Honestly, even at any age, even your adult children, you should not be putting your marriage problems on. That's not fair, but especially if your child's not old enough to read.
Right, especially at the ripe age of 4 years old.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, like, how could you...
That was Whitney's page, wasn't it?
Probably.
I think so, yeah.
It's always Whitney.
You did? Yes.
Sorry wants Jenny, because, little kids can't ask unknown adults things. They need to ask an adult to ask the adult things. Once Jenny asked Sam and Dean about the thing in our closet, the figure on fire that she saw, and immediately the reaction that they have is like, it's like, I don't even know how to describe what happens. Like, everybody's face just like drops, and then we cut to them outside. Sam's like keyed up, and Dean is like more keyed up. But Dean is more keyed up that Sam's a psychic than the fact that their old house might be haunted. And yeah, I think we touched on this when we were talking about the fact that they've been raised to kill anything that's supernatural, because Sam is doing some stuff that is not natural at this point.
Yeah, like a haunted house is different from a haunted brother.
Yeah.
Well, also, Sam can't control it. It just happens to him.
Right.
Yeah.
That too. I think if Sam could control some of this, it would be better in some ways.
Yeah, like, I think Dean has come to terms with, like, their childhood home being a not great place, but, like, his brother, like, the brother that tried to be normal, like, that's gotta hurt.
And especially in the context, and this is before, other characters get introduced, Sam is likely kind of Dean's rock in a way, kind of his anchor, because, and this is something, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting my experiences in childhood, but when you move around a lot and you don't have a definitive place of home, you tend to, like, attach that to whatever has been constant through your life. And I know for me, my sister, she's always been there. No matter where I went, she was there. No matter what friends I made, she was always my friend.
Yeah.
And so I'm definitely true for Dean, who couldn't really have that relationship with his father, couldn't really attach that emotionally with his father, or really be emotionally vulnerable with John at all.
At all.
So I think he really did, like, attach that kind of concept and dynamic to Sam.
He's assigned so much of his self-worth to Sam as well.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That if anything goes wrong with Sam,
all of it. It's his fault.
He's attached all of his self-worth to Sam.
Exactly.
yeah.
It's like, I really love that we were talking about Sam being Dean's anchor. Like, he's kind of holding to him to kind of keep the darkness away. But what happens when Sam could possibly be part of the darkness?
Oh, man.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, Dean just cannot afford for anything to go wrong with Sam.
Right.
For himself. Partially for Sam. Obviously, he loves Sam. That's the root of all of his self-worth being attached to Sam, is his love for Sam.
Right.
But it's, even if he loses Sam, it's not just that he's going to lose Sam, it's that he'll have no self-worth and no purpose. He'll feel like, even though he's put a lot of like his character into helping other people and at the expense of himself, his attachment of his self-worth to Sam, I think, overrides that even if he loses Sam, it won't matter that he saves anybody. That'll trump anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's freaking out that something could be up with Sam.
Losing Sam means losing himself.
Yeah.
Right.
And then Sam asked Dean how much he actually remembered about the actual night that Mary died, because obviously Sam doesn't know anything, really. And Dean says he remembers that there was a fire, and he remembers that he carried Sam out the front door, and Sam didn't know that detail, and that confirms that I was right in episode 3 that Dean himself did not physically see Mary die, which is good. But John definitely told them, like, what he saw often, because they know. And also what I said in the pilot, when we talked about the pilot, that they just never talked about that night, like, Dean's experiences. Like, they just didn't talk about Mary.
Right. I think that taking the moment to recognize Dean's perspective is really important, because, like, it's helping, I don't know, us, like, the audience, and maybe the characters to kind of separate, like, his thoughts and feelings from what John might have taught him.
Yes.
Also, they have the very fresh reminder of Jess's death to contextualize the story of what happened to their mom. Like, that's always been the story. Like, I saw your mother on the ceiling, and then, like, the cut and the fire. That's a story, and it's scary, and they've seen a lot of, like, supernatural things, so obviously, they believed that story, but they saw that. They saw what that looked like when Jess died.
Right.
And that put that story into they gave them a visual and a sensory memory of what that looks and sounds and feels like. Sam asks if this feels like just another job to Dean, because they're trying to work it like it's just another job, and Dean doesn't answer him, but what he does do is he walks around the corner and starts crying on the phone to their dad. Dean's number in John's voicemail has changed. It's now 866-907-3235. In Phantom Traveler, it was 785-555-0179, and 0179 is Dean's birthday, January 1979.
This could be just like a continuity thing, but if you want to, you could look at it as John is somehow keeping track of what Dean's number is and changing it accordingly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe.
They never thought about that either, because, like, when they call him, it's a different number, so they know he's alive, and they know he doesn't want to talk to them.
Yeah.
Yay.
Exactly.
I think that's worse.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely worse. But yeah, it is. Even the first time that the voicemail changed, it was like the phone number had been like dead for a while, so they knew that he was alive then as well. And